All right, so today we're going to continue on with writing our proofs. And as you can see, I highlighted some more reasons in our proof. You can see that we have our postulates like our angle addition postulate, vertical angles are congruent. Definition of, this one is crucial. This one is any definition that we use in our class can be used as one of our reasons in our proof. And then we have segment addition postulate. And then we also have all right angles are congruent. So we're going to continue on writing our proof like we did in our previous video. So you can see our first example here. We start with our given and what we're proving. And now our whole proof is blank. So we're going to start off by filling in our first statement. So here I have a negative 100 minus parentheses 4x minus 2 equals negative 94. And the reason why we write that is because it is given. Then the next step is what we're going to do next. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to distribute that negative. So I distributed that negative to get that negative 4x, positive 2. And then we write distributive property. Okay. The next step I can do on the left-hand side, we want to clean this up. So I am going to combine like terms. So here I have negative 98 minus 4x equals negative 94. Again, my reason for writing that is because we combined like terms. Our next step, to get x by itself, I'm going to add 98 to both sides. Notice I'm not showing that step. I am just writing what comes after that. So here I have negative 4x equals 4. How I got there is because of our addition. Addition POE. Remember, POE is property of equality. And then to get x by itself, we can divide both sides. And when I divide both sides, I have x equals 1. And that is my division, property of equality. Remember, we want to end with what is given in our proof statement, and we did just that. All right, so now we're going to go on to the next page. The next page is going to look a little different, but we're still going to continue with the same process. So on our next page, we have our next proof. All right, so before we get into the proof, I really want to look at that diagram. So looking at the diagram gives me a lot of information. So we start out with our given. Angle 1 is congruent to angle 4, and we want to prove that angle 2 is congruent to angle 3. So that's what we want to prove. So angle 1 is congruent to angle 4. So I want to start there. I actually want to write on my paper that given information. So angle 1 is congruent to angle 4. Remember, those curve markings show me that they're congruent. Now, I want to put some information in my problem to get me to angle 2 and 3 being congruent. I can't just jump and say they're congruent. I have to show my steps. So clearly I can see there are some relationships. So what I can see is that we have supplementary angles, and I'm just abbreviating. Supplementary angles, remember that's 180 degrees. I know that angle 1 and 4 are supplementary. They are also linear. Remember linear pairs. That is when we have supplementary angles and on the same line making 180 degrees. And last but not least, we also have vertical angles. So that's the key information in this diagram, and that's going to help me get to my solution. So we're going to start off with writing our given. So I have angle 1 is congruent to angle 4. Now, thinking about these three pieces of information that I have, what's really going to help me right now is my vertical angles. And that's what I'm going to stick with. So I'm going to link what I know. So I know that angle 1 is congruent to angle 3. So think about that. Angle 1 is congruent to angle 3. And why is that? That is because they are vertical angles. I use symbols wherever I can, so vertical angles are congruent. All right, my next piece of information, I could also say angle 4 and angle 2. Angle 4 is congruent to angle 2. Again, same reason. Vertical angles are congruent. Now, this is where we want to get our information linked together. So I'm going to start by saying that I know that I have angle 4 and angle 2, but I also know something else about angle 4. Angle 4 is congruent to angle 1. So I can say that not only is angle 4 congruent to angle 2, I could say angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. And why would that be? How would I be able to do that? What did I do to bring in that information? I took that information from up top, but what do we call it? And what we call that is we call that substitution. I swapped out angle 4 for angle 1. Okay. Now remember, in line 2 here, I also know something else about angle 1. I know that angle 1 is also congruent to angle 3. So here I can say angle 3 is congruent to angle 2. How'd I do that? Again, swapped it out, which we're going to call substitution. Now, am I done? 99% of the way. What we don't like to see is we have it written in reverse. So we want to fix that. So I'm actually going to add an extra step. So I'm going to actually say angle 2 is congruent to angle 3. We want to make sure it's written the exact same way as in the proof line that they're giving us. And the reason we can write that is that special property of symmetric. We can flip around what we write. And we are done. All right, so we were able to get from angle 1 and angle 4 being congruent to showing that angle 2 and angle 3 are also congruent based on the information provided. All right, so we're going to try again in the next example. In the next example, we can see angle 2 is congruent to angle 5. Again, those curve markings show congruent angles. So I'm going to write that here. So angle 2 is congruent to angle 5. And that is given. Now, they give us a lot of angles here. We have 8 angles on this diagram, but I don't want to talk about all 8 angles. I only want to talk about what angles are linked to angle 2 and angle 5. That will help me connect information. So I could talk about angle 2 first. I could say angle 2 is congruent to angle 4. How do I know it's congruent to angle 4? Because angles 2 and 4 are vertical angles. Vertical angles are congruent. All right, now we're going to bring in that angle 5 piece. Angle 5 is congruent to angle 8. Again, vertical angles, writing that same reason. Vertical angles are congruent. So now we're going to play around with the information that we have. So now I can say angle 5 is congruent to angle 4. How did I get there? I looked at this piece of information and I swapped out angle 2 for angle 5. What do we call for swapping out? We call that our substitution. And then we know in step 3, we know 5 is congruent to 8. So I can say angle 4 is congruent to angle 8. Again, we swapped out that angle and we're going to call that substitution. So again, we're only really playing around with the information that we know. Vertical angles helps us get there. All right, let's look at our next example. All right, so it says given that angle 1 and 2 are supplementary, and then we have angle 2 and 3 supplementary, and we want to prove angle 1 is congruent to angle 3. First thing I see is vocabulary. Vocabulary is key. So you want to make sure you pay attention to your vocabulary. That's going to give you some clues. All right, so we're going to start with angle 1 and angle 2 are supplementary. I'm going to abbreviate just to fit it on my line, and that is given. I'm also going to write angle 2 and angle 3 are supplementary. You're allowed to put given on both lines because it's two pieces of information. I like to separate them. You could also write them in one spot. All right, so now what we're going to do is understand that key term. What does supplementary mean? Supplementary means that my two angles equal 180 degrees. That means I can actually write an equation. So line 1 is going to help me write line 3. I'm going to write the measure of angle 1 plus the measure of angle 2 equals 180 degrees. Again, you told me that supplementary is 180 degrees. We can come up with that equation, and we did just that. We're showing it. And the reason we can write that is because we defined our vocabulary. So we're going to be specific. Definition of supplementary. All right, we're going to do the same thing again for line 2. Line 2, we have angle 2 and angle 3 are supplementary. That gives us another equation. What equation would that be? Right, it's going to be the measure of angle 1 plus, measure of angle 2 plus the measure of angle 3 equals 180 degrees. Same reason, definition of supplementary. All right, so now we have to figure out how are we going to get to angle 1 equals angle 3. So we have to do a little bit of work. So in line 3 and line 4, I hope you see we have something in common. They both have 180 in common, and they also have angle 2 in common. So watch how I write my next line. My next line, I'm going to write measure of angle 1 plus measure of angle 2 equals measure of angle 2 plus measure of angle 3. Now, why is that? Well, it makes sense because they both equal 180, and that is what I'm showing. I'm showing that both of the equations equal 180 at the same time. I know that they're both in that same relationship. I linked them together. And because I linked them together, the term that we use for linking them together is our transitive property. So again, that allowed us to link it together. Now, on my next line here, you can see that I have the measure of angle 2 on both sides. If I subtract the measure of angle 2 from both sides, I am now left with the measure of angle 1 equal to the measure of angle 3. That would be our subtraction property of equality. Again, I'm abbreviating. Now, does our line 6 look like our proof statement? And the answer would be not quite. So I'm going to add a line because you can add a step if you need to. And I'm going to say angle 1 is congruent to angle 3. Why? So this is a little different. We needed to get rid of that M. Remember, M stands for the measure of. So need to rid of M. And to do that, we're just dropping in and that congruency symbol, and that is definition of congruence. All right, so we just have to be mindful of how we're going step by step. We want to make sure we're using our vocabulary, we're linking our information together, we're really seeing what our picture is showing us. Our picture and vocabulary are key in this lesson. So you want to make sure we're paying attention to all those bits and pieces. All right, so we're going to try some practice in class. Make sure you pay attention and write all this down. Make sure you have a highlighter. We want to make sure we're highlighting our key terms and using our diagram to our benefit. All right, see you in class.